Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. So last time we talked, I was sharing about my first visit to the synagogue, how I had left Christianity, and I embraced Judaism, and I was starting on a conversion process. I had my first Jewish holiday in the last video. It was called Purim, where we celebrate Esther. So today I'm going to change focus a little bit, and we're going to talk about my first time experiencing a bunch of the major festivals or celebrations in Judaism. The awesome thing that I really have come to enjoy and appreciate about Judaism is when they have a festival or a celebration, it's for a specific reason. It's to remember something they did or to celebrate an accomplishment they had, something. And the awesome part is it lines up in the Torah. It lines up between the Torah, the stories, and actual history, where shockingly, when I learned that Jesus' birthday was not December 25th, okay, I could get in touch with that. But when I found out that they actually changed Christmas or Jesus' birthday to align with a pagan holiday, mind blown. I thought, okay, maybe it's just pure coincidence. But then it kept coming. The Christmas trees that a lot of people use, that's not a Christian thing. It's a pagan thing. It's a pagan thing from before Jesus was even around in that timeline. They used to bring trees and set them ablaze to honor their gods or their worshipers or whomever they were. And it was a pagan tradition that Christians tried to flip and make this. That didn't sit right with me. On Christmas for Christians, for Easter, for Christians, they sometimes talk about a bunny, or they talk about the tomb, and they talk about eggs and all these different things. Again, eggs and the timing of Easter is right around another pagan holiday. A pagan holiday that's supposed to celebrate the goddess of fertility. That's why the egg is there, for fertileness and things like that. So there's just too many situations where pagan traditions that supersede Christianity override, or Christians are trying to twist different things that used to be pagan, and it doesn't. I don't like it. I don't like it. There's an uncomfortableness in me when I think about it. So I don't do Easter baskets. I don't in my personal house. I don't have a Christmas tree. I don't celebrate Christmas. I don't need a tree. I don't do that. If you do, that's up to you. But in my heart, with my knowledge, that doesn't jive. I need things around me that support who I am and who I want to be. And I am not a pagan person. I'm not. So let's talk about what I am, okay? So the first holiday we're going to talk about is Passover, also known as Pesach. It is about a week long, 8 days to be specific, and it's not a joyous holiday. Jewish people are typically never super excited for Pesach because during that week, we don't have any leavened products as a whole. So no breads. Depending on your tradition and your practice level, you might not do any grains like wheat or noodles. You might not do certain beans. You might not do potatoes. It's all different levels of your observances. But the big thing about Pesach is you either try to go to a Seder or you host a Seder. And a Seder is a big meal with specific things where you read a book that tells about the story of how the Jewish people were exiled from Egypt and the slavery that was in Egypt and all the hardships that came about. All of that. It's a time to remember, and it's rather solemn. And there's a lot of food, as with any Jewish tradition, but a lot of the food is not, in my opinion, very tasty. Now, truth be told, I am a very picky eater. I am. So I have some props today. So this is a Seder plate. At a Seder dinner, you're going to have some food that symbolizes different things. And while you're telling the story from the Haggadah, you're going to talk about different elements. Okay? So let's talk about the Seder plate a little bit, and then I can explain a little bit more for why you have the different things. And I'll give you some little laughable moments about how I responded to that. Okay? Sounds great. Okay. Let's start on top. So we have an egg. So eggs in the Seder tradition and the Jewish tradition, it can mean different things depending on how you observe it. So eggs could mean mourning of a life that was lost. It could also be spring of rebirth, when we were given a new chance. I personally don't like eggs. So there's a hard-boiled egg, and you can't really be rude. The only way you skip a section is typically if you're allergic to it. So you have to take a little teeny tiny bite. And on my first Seder at my synagogue, my wonderful boyfriend was with me, and he teased me quite a bit because I'm a picky eater, and yeah, I was not thrilled to have a hard-boiled egg that needed to be on my Seder plate and I needed to eat. The next thing we had was horseradish. Basically, it's sometimes called marrow. It's a really potent, strong item that is supposed to remind you of how we had to have strength and how it was bitter, and it was not a fun time to be Jewish back in the time that we were in Egypt and put into exile. It was to remind you of the harshness of it. Okay. Next we have a shank bone. Typically the picture on here shows a shank bone from a lamb or a ram. Shank bones are supposed to indicate, and I may butcher this completely because I'm still new, and please be gracious to me. But the shank bone is supposed to indicate strength and vitality and a source of life. So even in all of our hardships, we still had a life force to go forward, okay? Next we have some haroshet. This is an interesting one. It kind of looks like applesauce, but it's made with apples and wine, raisins and nuts all mixed together. It doesn't taste bad, but again, I'm a picky eater, and that it's not the most tasty thing on the plate. It's one of the top ones for me, but it was not my go-to. I don't regularly try to get haroshet in my diet on a normal basis. But of all the things on the plate, it was one of the more palatable ones. And I have two more. One is bitter herbs. And the bitter herbs, we dip them in salt water. So salt water is to remind us of the tears that the Hebrew people shed for the lives that were lost, the harshness of the time in Egypt when we were enslaved, just to remember that was a very challenging time. Okay? And the last one we have is parsley or potato. Again, that's just to remind us that even in the worst of times, we were able to survive. It wasn't pleasant. Again, everything that is on the plate is typically made with salt, and a lot of salt to remind us of how many tears were shed. That's the Seder plate. They go through the Seder plate when you talk about the Haggadah and the story. It's very important. Another very important part of a Seder dinner is wine. There is a lot of wine. Depending on your Seder, you are either encouraged to drink 2 or 4 glasses of wine. And it's a very long, drawn out process. You're supposed to relax. Many people will have pillows on their chair around the table, because while we recognize and remember how harsh their conditions were and what they lived through, we recline or lean back or take it easy to acknowledge the fact that our life is easier because of all the struggles that they went through. So it's a great night for conversing with people. Lots of new foods. You will typically have matzo ball soup on a Pesach meal, and matzo ball soup, delicious. 2 thumbs up easily for me. Loved that. Love that. It's kind of like a chicken noodle soup, but instead of noodles, it's a big ball, and it's made out of matzah, which is this flat, unleavened bread. Kind of, think of like a saltine cracker without the salt. Yeah, not super tasty, but Jewish people get very creative in how they can work with matzah during the week of Pesach, so we can stay kosher or follow the dietary laws that are prescribed during that time. Okay, so lots of fun things. They take matzah and they break it. They hide a piece sometimes, because the week of Pesach leading up to it, like, you're supposed to get rid of all leaven products from your house, and many people will like clean their entire kitchen, or they'll cover all their shelves with aluminum foil to get rid of all the, we call it haman. It's little crumbs that are supposed to be left behind. We want to get rid of all of that so we can put ourselves in the place that our ancestors were, so we could appreciate them a little bit more. And you may be wondering, well, you came out of that. Why would you go back and celebrate that again? And it's not that we're celebrating being in the wilderness and having to have leavened bread because we couldn't wait for things to rise. We're not celebrating it, we're remembering it. And it's the Jewish people, we don't want to forget where we came from, because if you forget where you came from, you'll lose appreciation for how far we've come and all that our ancestors had to endure. So very important, Pesach. I can share with you, at one point, at my table, there was my boyfriend, and there was the director of learning for our synagogue and her husband, and another gentleman and his son at our table, and we were having a conversation, and the director of learning and my boyfriend were having quite the lovely time teasing or chiding me about different things. And at one point, there's a stack of matzah, and the director of learning said, "Oh, you have to put your hand out here, and do you feel the heat? And this is you're supposed to remember this." And then I'm like, okay, and I'm going along with it. I'm naive. I don't know any better. Well, my boyfriend is just cutting up because he just thinks it's ridiculous how naive I am about some things, that it's just comical. All in good fun, but yeah, I would do just about anything to figure out what was going on. So that was the first Pesach. I went to my second Pesach this year. I can tell you the food doesn't necessarily taste better, but I do appreciate the story and everything that goes along with it. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you about another food. There's another food called gefilte fish. The best way I can describe it is mashed up fish paired with Jell-O. Yeah, tasty, isn't it? Gefilte fish, people can grow a fondness for it. No, not for me. It has a funky texture. It tastes like fish, but I don't care for the texture. It's not like regular fish. If I could eat one food, I would just stick with the matzo ball soup and that'd be okay. But again, it's important to do all the different aspects of the Seder plate to remember all that our ancestors went through. So that's Passover, also known as Pesach. The next holiday that comes after that is Shavuot. And Shavuot is all about when the Jewish people celebrate when Moses received the Torah from God. That's also when he was given the Ten Commandments, or the Ten Commandments were given to us. But Shavuot is when we celebrate that. We actually start counting towards that. They counted the days of Omer, from Pesach, the second night of Pesach, all the way to Shavuot. When we get to 40, we're at Shavuot. And we celebrate then. And you know how we celebrate? We eat more food, because that's what Jewish people do. At Shavuot, it's all about dairy food. The dairy is to remind us of the land of milk and honey. That's the phrase from the Torah. So a lot of Jewish people will actually have cheesecake. Yeah, I can handle cheesecake. You can keep the gefilte fish. I'll take the cheesecake. But that's a very important holiday and a very important celebration, remembering when we received the Torah, the book of life, the instructions for all of us. It's very important to the Jewish people. Moving right along, there's a couple more celebrations that are what we call minor holidays. There's little things that go throughout that aren't necessarily as big of a deal in the Jewish faith, much like in the Christian faith, whether it's Pentecost or some people do a bigger deal for Lent, or some people do a bigger deal for All Saints Day, things like that. The smaller holidays, there's quite a few of them scattered throughout the year. I'm going to skip over them for the sake of time, quite honestly. I'll cover them later. But the next one that I want to talk about is called Rosh Hashanah, and it's actually the Jewish New Year. Now, remember, like New Year, like a typical American New Year, there's lots of partying, lots of colors, lots of celebration, lots of joy. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time. I can remember walking into the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, and so on the sides of the synagogue, inside the building in our worship space, we have these boards with lights on. And all the lights are connected to names of people who have passed. Yeah, so as we observe their what's called a Yorkside, or their anniversary of their passing, the light by their name will turn on so we can remember them. Because as Jews, we don't want to forget anyone, because everyone is important to the history, to the story of telling Torah. Everyone is important to God, so why would we forget them? So beautiful moment walking in to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. I had the wonderful pleasure of attending Rosh Hashanah with my mom. She came with me, and that was very special to me. Everyone is present. Rosh Hashanah is one of what's referred to frequently in the Jewish community as a high holy day. For Christians, your high holy days are typically Christmas and Easter. For the Jewish people, it's typically Pesach and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So Rosh Hashanah is beautiful. Everyone's lights on the side are on. So there's a beautiful glow, and everything is shiny and it's new, and it's the synagogue has put on its best dress for welcoming the new year, celebrating the year to come. And it's a very exciting time. Very exciting time. So Rosh Hashanah does not coincide time-wise with the American calendar, not the English calendar either. So our New Year is not in January. Typically, our New Year is in September, October, somewhere in there. It all depends on the phases of the moon and the days, and there's a whole rhythm. But Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Passover are on every calendar. They're on the English calendar, so you can at least know what it means when you see Rosh Hashanah. It is the Jewish New Year. It's a day of celebration, and it's a wonderfully beautiful day. The next day, about 10 days, I believe, after Rosh Hashanah, is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a very solemn day. It's a day of atonement. So every year, Jewish people between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they work on apologizing or making things right. So if they offended people, if they did a sloppy job on a building construction or something like that, they want to make things right, because on the Day of Atonement, we believe God or Hashem seals the book of life for that year, that past year. So it's kind of like a limbo period where you should certainly apologize when something happens, but it's a day to kind of gather your chickens and make sure everything is accounted for. Okay, so Yom Kippur, solemn holiday. Many people will actually take off in the Jewish community, and they go to many services, and they'll visit Jewish cemeteries, and they will just remember all the lives. It's a beautiful day. It's a very somber day. Sometimes people fast on that day. Sometimes people wear white on that day. It's up to your observances. But Yom Kippur is another high holy day in the Jewish calendar. Okay, next up is an interesting one. When I first heard about this one, I thought it was really neat, and I rather wanted to do it. And then I learned more about it, and I got cold feet, to be perfectly honest. The next holiday up is called Sukkot. And Sukkot is, it's called the Feast of the Tabernacles, or the Festival of the Tabernacles, my apologies. And when the Jewish people were in the wilderness, they had to make these huts, and because they were constantly on the move. So the Festival of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, you build a temple, kind of like a tent. It has to have sides, and it has to have a top, and there are specific dimensions that it has to have, but it has to be outside. And the ceiling of it needs to be open enough that you can see the stars, so you can get the real feel. Sounds great, right? Like, yes, if I had children, like, I could absolutely see them getting super excited to build this tent outside, also known as a sukkot, or a sukkah, and be very excited about it. However, Sukkot typically occurs between October and November, somewhere in there. Again, depending on the time. I live in Wisconsin, and it's cold. And if you build a structure, you are supposed to eat in it every day. It needs to be up for 7 days. And you're supposed to invite people to come in and eat with you. It's, again, to remind you of the Jewish people having to set up tabernacles or structures, and they're constantly on the move, but always welcoming people and encouraging people along. The Jewish people are very welcoming, so it makes complete sense that they would want to have people welcomed into their Sukkot. It just gets really cold. And in talking to my boyfriend, he said he has done that a couple of times, And he said by day 2 or 3, it gets kind of tiring. And it's not necessarily fun for kids to be outside in cold weather, understandably. So some synagogues will have one for their whole community, and they will just kind of take turns, and maybe there's going to be a men's night in the Sukkot and they're going to do something there, or it's going to be a family night and they're going to do something. They try to make it more active and engaging, because it's a lot of work to gather the materials, make the structure, decorate the structure. That's another big thing. You have to decorate it in a certain way. It's a lot of requirements, and then you have to be out there, and then you have to take it down after. It's a wonderful meaning and symbolity behind it. It's just a tougher one for me to do because I don't like the cold. But nevertheless, the next holiday that I want to talk about is actually the one that intrigued me the most when I was in the middle school years and thinking about just the beauty of the Jewish traditions, and that was Hanukkah. So Hanukkah has a special candle holder. It's called a Hanukkah, and you might have seen one before. I would show you mine, but it's broken. So it just doesn't have the same effect. I have to get a new one for the next Hanukkah. But it has 4 candles. And then in the middle, there's a shamash, sorry. And that's the worker candle. So you light them in a certain order, and there's a prayer you say each night, and you have the lights lit, and it's known as the Festival of Lights. It is not a major holiday. It is not. Many people try to correlate Hanukkah like it's the Jewish Christmas. Not even close. Not even close. Hanukkah is a family gathering. It's a festival of lights. It's a miracle that they are celebrating. There's a story that goes along with it, and I'm not going to ruin the story because I'm going to do a different video as it gets closer. But there's a specific story. Many of the Jewish people will make little potato pancakes almost. They're called latkes. And many kids will play a game with a little top called a dreidel. And there's little coins that get passed around. Sometimes they're called gelt. Lots of little things. But in my experience, Jewish holidays are less about the things and more about the who and the why. That's the biggest comparison that I have found. My experience with Christian holidays is it's more about the what. What are we getting? What are we receiving? What is the tree gonna look like? What's in my Easter basket? Things like that. And it's less about, okay, why are you celebrating Christmas? Why are you celebrating Easter? What does an Easter basket have to do with the story of Jesus? It doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus. But they can try to make something make work. Whereas the practices of the Jewish faith, everything that they're doing ties directly back to what their ancestors did to help us remember some important thing. Some important event, some important person, all these different things. And I really like that every festival or holiday or special day or whatever in the Jewish tradition, it had a deeper meaning. That very much resonated with me. I like doing things for a purpose, not just because this is what we've always done. Okay? So we've talked a lot about the holidays. Did you know that there is a holiday or a festival in the Jewish faith every single week? There is. There is a special thing that Jewish people do. Again, different levels of observances, different levels of how much they do it, but it's called Shabbat. Shabbat is when the Jewish people celebrate or remember when God took his day of rest from creation. He created the world, and then on the seventh day, he rested. And he said, remember the Sabbath, and keep it holy. The Sabbath is our Shabbat. So just like with everything, when God created the world, he created light and he created dark. Okay, well, if he create light, before light is dark. So most Jewish holidays start when it gets dark. So it starts at sundown the day prior. So for Shabbat, for example, it will start at sundown on Friday and go all the way until sundown on Saturday. That's how we do it. Shabbat, again, different based on your level of observance. People will either not use electricity at all. They might not cook any food. They might not work at all. They might go and only do things that they enjoy. All different levels of observances. But typically, you'll start your Shabbat with a Shabbat dinner. So you will have 2 candles. These candles are important for welcoming in Shabbat. So there's a prayer that we do with the candles, and then you have a Kiddush cup that you drink from to symbolize the fruit from the vine and that God has given us sustenance. And then you typically have, it's some form of bread. It can be challah bread, which is a special bread that's braided. It could be a pretzel, it could be a cracker, something to symbolize bread, something. I don't care if it's a bagel. But those are the 3 things that you typically have welcoming in Shabbat. And then it's basically just a pause. It's a purposeful pause in your week. How you observe it is up to you and your practice. For me, we tend to have, we welcome Shabbat, we watch service, and then we have a movie night typically. We just relax and we watch a movie. And Shabbat is, again, about resting. So my boyfriend is much better at it than I, but we will try. He will sleep in quite a bit. I will sleep in for a while, and then I'll go to services in the morning. Then we take another nap when we come home, because that's Shabbat. It's a day of rest, a day of pause from the busyness of the week. And it sounds awesome, but I can also tell you that after probably the second or third week, there was an internal struggle of, I have all this downtime. Like I could go vacuum, or I could do this. I'm a teacher by trade. There's always something to do for teachers. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle, but that purposeful pause has become one of my most cherished things in Jewish culture and customs. That is something I look forward to every week. It's a hustle to get ready for it. I don't doubt that at all, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. But it is something truly beautiful. It's a time to connect with other people, rest, relax, take a purposeful pause from work to enjoy the beauty that's around you, or life is going to pass you by before you know it. Then to conclude Shabbat, we have another set of prayers that we do, and it's called a Havdalah service. And that's at the end of it. Again, we use the Kiddush cup. We take a small sip and then we do something else. We have a very fancy candle. It's typically a braided candle to remind us that we're all interwoven, and it gives quite a bright light. And after we light the candle, we say a prayer for the candle and we shine our fingers on it. And some people will kind of look for shadows between the fingers. Some will look for reflections, on their fingernails. But basically to thank Hashem for work, because everything has a purpose, even light, and that's a work. And we thank him for the ability to do work. And that's a beautiful thing. And we also have some spices. Mine have some bay leaves and some different things. And when we pass this around, it's to remind us of the sweet things to come. And we do one short little sniff, and then we do a longer one to remind us of the sweetness and then to carry us through the week and look for the good in the world. It's a very beautiful, symbolic, purposeful praise and prayer that we are doing. Again, Shabbat is one of my favorites by far. I very much enjoy it. So there we go. We started with Pesach and some very interesting food choices, and I briefly ran you through a lot of the different holidays. Not all of them. I'll get to more of them as we get through everything else, and I can teach you a little bit more about each of the different holidays. But I wanted to give you a framework for at least the different holidays and my experiences of them. They're all beautiful in their own way. All beautiful in their own way. And coming into Judaism from a Christian background, I was a bit nervous about, oh, I'm going to miss the lights and the beauty of Christmas and this, that, and the other thing. Not really, because there is something so beautiful about all the other traditions that we have in Judaism. I still appreciate a house that's decorated beautifully. Absolutely. I'm not blind. I can see that. But I don't need to have a Christmas tree. I don't need to have my trees outside my house all decorated and things like that. That's not needed for me. I love the fact that any holiday celebration festival in the Jewish tradition has ties to what was actually done in Torah, whether it's what was physically done or we're remembering specific things, we're doing specific things for this reason. I like having that meaning behind the holidays and how we celebrate them. Whew, that was a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Again, please don't harp on me too much. I'm still new. I'm still learning, and I'm certainly going to go over the different holidays as we come along and share some more ideas and more things, maybe even some different ways on how you could incorporate different aspects into your household or your family practices or things like that. Next time, we are going to get back on track and we're going to talk about my conversion some more. We're going to talk about the class that I needed to take, and we're going to talk about a paper that I need to write for my conversion. I'm not finished with my conversion yet, but I'm still in the process. So I'll tell you the next couple of steps for that. Okay, so the next question that we're going to be talking about or conquering is, why do I have to go back to class? There's always more to learn. Why do I have to go back to class is next time. And until then, I hope you take care. Bye-bye.